continuous. So to understand the past continuous, we need to first understand what the continuous means, and the best way to get a good understanding of that is to watch my video about the present continuous, because the past continuous has the same meaning as the present continuous. The only difference is that instead of being at the present moment, the present continuous is at the present moment, it is at a past moment. So let's just quickly go over what the present continuous means. Again, like I said, if you want to get a better understanding, I recommend watching my video about the present continuous. But anyway, the present continuous means essentially that the activity of whatever verb we're using is temporary. So if I say I live in Europe, this is present simple. I am saying just simply that I live in Europe, and that's it. There's no meaning temporary or not temporary. If I want to add the meaning that this is a temporary thing that is happening, then I would say I am living in Europe. Now, this doesn't mean for sure that this is a temporary thing. We don't have any details about that, and we're not 100% sure about that. But it has this kind of implication, it has this kind of indirect meaning that this is a temporary thing. And this is the reason that sometimes we need to use the continuous, because some things are just naturally temporary. So if I say she's sleeping, well, she won't sleep forever. That's naturally a temporary thing. That's why I say she's sleeping instead of saying she sleeps. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's the continuous means temporary, and it's going to mean that also in the past. Okay, so let's look at that in a diagram first, though, so that we can compare. So if this thing right here, if this line, vertical line right here, is the present moment, right now, the present moment, then the continuous would be some kind of activity happening like this. And we'll put this bracket here to to show that this is a temporary thing. This is something that has an ending. Okay, now that's the present continuous again. Now the past continuous is going to be exactly the same, like I said, but instead of being at the present moment, it's a temporary thing at a past moment. So let's look at an example. I was sleeping at 3 a.m. last night. All right, so I was sleeping. Here's a temporary activity in the continuous. Again, sleeping. That's temporary. While you're alive, it's temporary. And this is happening, instead of happening now, it's happening at a past moment in time, and this past moment in time is 3 a.m. last night. Past moment. Let's look at another example. I was sleeping. Let's change the verb. I was reading when you called. Okay, again, we have a temporary activity. Reading, you just read for a little while. You don't Can't read constantly. And again, at a past moment in time. Now this time, the past moment in time is a little bit different. Okay, notice here that the past moment in time was actually a time. It was an actual time. And here, instead of being time, it's when you called. It's a time when something happened in that case. All right, so these are actually two ways that we can do what I call defining the moment. Okay, you're gonna need to define the moment somehow in order to use the past continuous. And this will also be true of the past perfect. This will also be true of the future perfect and the future continuous. This idea of defining the moment, or this, I don't know, this thing that we do when we define the moment is something that we do for all of these tenses. And the past continuous is one of those. So if the reason is because these tenses are kind of relative. So they're saying that it's something that is going to end later, and for it to end later, there's got to be something that is ending later than. With the past perfect, it will be something happened before some moment. Well, in order for something to happen before some moment, you also have to have that moment for it to make any sense. So just logically, in order to have these tenses, given the meanings that they have, given that they have meanings where they compare two moments in time, two different moments in time, we have to have both of those moments. You have to have, and one of those moments is always going to be the defined moment. So, like I said, we have these two ways of defining the moment. So, one is just to state the time. So just give a time. 3 a.m. last night. Be this type. And the other way is to give a past simple event. Now this is for past, and when we get to the future perfect and continuous, then it will be a future event given in the present simple. But if when we're in the past, that the other way to define the moment is going to be to give a past simple event, and that was when you're called. Let's put the add in here. So okay, so far what do we understand? We have a temporary activity at a past moment that we define. We're going to define that moment. Okay, so that's most of what we have to understand, but there's one more thing that we should think about, and that is when we have two verbs in the past, like we did here. Let's use the same example. Two events in the past, or two verbs in the past. If we have two verbs in the past, which one should we use a continuous with, and which one should we use the past simple with? And should we use the continuous with any of them? All right, so let's look at it. Let's use this example again. So the question that we're going to ask here is why shouldn't we say this? Why? Let's put it there. Why is it correct to say this one and not correct to say this one? Well, the reason is, well, let's look at one more example. Okay, so again, why is this top one correct and this bottom one incorrect? Now, the reason is that the continuous, the verb that we use continuous with, the past continuous, has to be longer than the defined moment. So the temporary activity that we use continuous with has to be longer in duration, in time in other words, than the defined moment. So why is that? Well, it's just logically necessary, because when we use continuous, we're saying that this temporary thing was happening at a moment in time, at this moment in time. In order for it to be happening at this moment in time, it has to happen for the full length of that time. For it to happen for the full length of that time, it has to be longer than that time. Okay, I guess I'll show you this. I can show you this in detail. So if I were to say something like, let's say this: I was eating lunch yesterday. Full stop. Okay, so here we have our verb in the continuous or temporary activity at a past moment. But look, yesterday is a whole day. So yesterday is actually longer then. Let's look at a diagram of this. So that would look like, if we make a yesterday this period right here. So here's when we wake up. Let's move this first. So here's when we wake up. We eat breakfast. We do something until lunchtime. Then we eat lunch, and we're eating lunch up here. And then here's the day goes on, and then here's the end of the day. All right, so you see, the temporary activity is not happening for the whole defined moment. The defined moment is longer, and because of that, it's only happening for part of the defined moment. So it's not logical. When we use the continuous, we're saying that the temporary activity is happening at a defined moment. If it's happening at that moment, it has to happen for that whole moment and then a little bit longer. Otherwise, it's not at that moment. Okay, it's not that important you understand that. You can think about that if you're interested. But that's the reason that the defined moment has to be longer. So let's make this clear. This is not good. Let's cross this out here. All right, this does not work. This is not correct. The defined moment, the temporary activity has to be longer than the defined moment. So that's why here I was reading when you called. Okay, reading is the longer thing. When you called is the shorter thing, and we can diagram this one too. You see, the defined moment does not have to be exactly just one moment. All right, so let's see. Well, reading is this one actually. Okay, but let's just use our imaginations here. And let's say they called and they rang for 30 seconds. All right, so in this defined moment is 30 seconds here. Okay, it's not exactly one moment, but it is still shorter. It is still some separate period of time, and it is shorter than this temporary activity. So it works to call this, to use this as a defined moment, right, and to use the continuous here. The doorbell rang. That's kind of exactly one moment. A better example, let's look at it down here. It'd be something like, I worked as the parade was passing by. Now, in this case, which is longer, well, which was our defined moment, worked, right? So that means parade is longer. So that can happen. There's a big celebration or something. The parade can be all day long. It's a holiday, maybe you can only work part of the day, and so that would be a possibility. But the working was more than just a moment, and so it would be again one of these situations where something happens for a period of time, but that's the only important thing is that that thing that you're talking about as a defined moment is shorter than this activity. Okay, one more detail that I can tell you is is that the temporary activity does not have to extend beyond the defined moment. So it doesn't have to, it can stop right at the defined moment, in other words. Okay, so let's say I was sleeping when you called, and woke me up. That's a correct sentence. And in that case, we have a situation where the temporary activity happens exactly at the defined moment. Now, what's important in this case is that it begins before the defined moment in order for it to be longer, right? So who knows? Maybe they just slept for 2 minutes. Let's make two little dots here. They slept for 2 minutes, maybe, for example. Okay, and but that would still make it longer than this thing of calling and waking them up. Woke them up on the first ring, but it's still slept for 2 minutes. Woke up on the first ring, but that is still longer. Okay, so let's go over everything. These are the most important ideas for the past continuous. Again, we want to understand what the continuous really means. It means that the activity of the verb is temporary. If you compare that with the present simple, the present simple doesn't mean temporary, it doesn't mean forever, it doesn't mean permanent, but it just doesn't have that temporary meaning in there. Like I live in Europe, doesn't mean forever, but if I say I'm living in Europe, I am adding some meaning that this activity is a temporary one. All right, and past continuous is just one of those temporary activities at a past moment in time instead of right now. Present continuous right now, past continuous temporary activity at a past moment in time. And that moment has to be defined. Again, that moment has to be defined in one of two ways. One is just to state the time. The other is to give a past simple event. Actually, it can also be a state. You can also say just something that was. So it's just really just past simple verb is what I should say. All right. So finally, the here, temporary activity that we use continuous with has to be longer, has to happen for longer than the defined moment. If the defined moment happens, or if it is, then however long it is. So that's about it. Thanks for watching.